Very good. How are you all doing today?
Good.
Excellent. All right, this is being recorded, just everybody, so everybody knows, and then we'll be able to post the recording of this afterwards for those who can't make it or want to re-watch it. We'll wait just a few more minutes, give some stragglers time to jump in here, and then we'll get started. Should we go ahead and get started?
Do it.
Okay, so welcome everybody to today's training. So this is, again, a redux of the intermediate training. Since we had a little problem with the recording last week, we decided to go ahead and do the intermediate training again for those who couldn't make it, and then to make sure that we get a good solid recording this time that we can post afterwards in case you would like to review that or anybody else that couldn't make the meeting today. So the agenda for today is going to be to go through kind of the bottom bar of controls that appear when you're hosting a meeting. We'll do a screen share of that in a moment. And Ray is going to be taking us through that. And then once Ray is done taking us through those bottom controls, I will be going through some of the settings from the web portal just to make sure that we know how to turn on these various settings and sort of what are some of the default options you can do for meetings that you're hosting. If you have questions, you're welcome to throw those into the chat. Manuel and Ahmad will be monitoring the chat and trying to answer questions or bringing those to our attention so that we can answer them during the presentation. And then we will have some time at the end as well to take some questions. You're muted by default, so if you do need to speak, just make sure you unmute yourself. But when you're done asking a question, we ask that you remute yourself so that we don't get any feedback through the mics. All right, well, then I think we're ready to go. So, one last thing, once the recording is ready, we'll be posting it on the Faculty One Stop, and I will be sending out an email to all faculty, staff, and adjuncts with a link to the One Stop page where the recording will be hosted. All right, well then I think we're ready to go. So let me start up the screen share and give control over to Ray. All right, Ray, I think you have control.
All right, let's double check. Can I do that? Perfect. Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to the Zoom Intermediate Training Part 2. Before we run across the bottom icons, I want to do a quick refresher on the top two you see over here in the top left corner. If you click on the little round eye here, this will give you all the information that you will possibly need about the actual meeting that you're in. It'll give you the meeting ID, who the current host is, what the meeting password is. It'll give you a link to the meeting. If you have late attendees or late invitees, you can actually just click right there, copy the link, and text or email or send that over. And finally, it'll also give you your participant ID. So there's really not much necessarily to do, but if you find yourself needing the link to the meeting, this is a handy way to find it. This little green check-marked shield here is a way to access the settings. So this takes you straight into the settings, and we're going to talk briefly about each of these. So under the general settings, there are a lot of things that you can do, not many that you would actually need to do necessarily to be effective. But if you are an advanced user, you use dual monitors, this is where you can set up dual monitors. It's, if you like to change skin tone of your icons, you can do that. You can set reminders and a few other things. So these are largely self-explanatory and sometimes necessary, but basically that's the summary of your general settings.
Right, sorry to interrupt for just a second, but is everybody able to see the screen share, see what he's doing in the settings? Okay, just wanted to double check. Sorry, Ray.
No worries, Bradley.
I can see that, but he doesn't seem to have control of the screen, because I can see Aman over in San Jose and you and Ray is just a blip on the side.
Yeah, we're not seeing the whole big grid of people anymore.
Right.
Well, you're not supposed to. This is a separate meeting that we're hosting. So we actually have two meetings that are running simultaneously, and so we're demoing the controls on just a 4-person meeting consisting of myself, Ray, Manuel, and Ahmad.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Bradley, do you want to touch on the video settings?
Yeah. So, and one of the ways you would get through the video settings is down here. So there's this video icon where you choose your video, which camera that you want. And so if you click on video settings, then you go into video, and this allows you to control various aspects of what your camera is doing. So there's little playful things you can do. Up in the right-hand corner, you can rotate your video. So, you can appear upside down to all the participants. Again, you can change the camera, which camera that you're currently using if you have more than one camera set up. Like if you have a laptop that has a built-in camera, but then you also have a USB camera that might be of higher quality, something like that. You can change the ratio if you have a camera that isn't by default 16:9. You can go original ratio or widescreen. You can enable HD for a higher quality image. One thing to be aware of when you have both video and an HD video enabled is it does take up more bandwidth. The bit rate is higher. So if you're ever having trouble in a meeting where you're getting a lot of frame skipping or it's freezing, it may be because you don't have a high enough quality internet connection at that moment. And so one thing you can do is disable HD or turn off your video in order to get a smoother connection. But if you have a good quality internet connection enabling HD, at least you're outputting a high quality video. It doesn't necessarily mean everybody else can receive that video, because that depends on their internet connection as well, but it potentially gives them the option. Mirror video, so you can switch the orientation, and that's just so that the perspective of the person watching the video would be as if they were facing you. You can touch up my appearance. That basically just adds kind of a little hazy filter. So presumably it's supposed to add like a makeup type effect, make you look nicer. Always display participants' names, so you can have that. So like on my screen, everybody's name appears in the bottom left-hand corner. So you can turn that option on and off. Turn off your video when joining a meeting, whether it's by default on or off. Always show preview video dialog when joining a meeting. So that means when you join a meeting, it'll start by popping up a little menu asking you to check your settings, check your video before you go in the meeting. But you can turn that option on and off as well, so you'll just jump straight into a meeting. You can hide non-video participants. Notice Manuel and Ray don't actually have their video showing, so you could turn that on and then they would just disappear. So people without that aren't displaying video. Just as a sort of pedagogical thing, when I'm with students, I generally keep that disabled because I want to know what students are there regardless of whether they have their video turned on or off. And generally, I will ask the students to turn on their video. Spotlight my video when I'm speaking. That just spotlights the person. And then display up to 49 participants in gallery view. This setting will depend somewhat on your hardware. It takes a higher end computer sometimes to do this, faster processor. So if you have a nicer computer or a newer computer, you can enable that, and then you can see up to 49 people in that grid view. But if you're finding, again, you have that enabled and it's causing lag or frame skips on your computer, you can disable that and it'll go down to, I think by default, it's 24. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's 24, 25. And that should help with your, with the quality of the connection.
Brad, real quick, while we're talking about the video settings, it looks like your shirt has something printed on it. What does, okay, there. So right now your Jessup looks backwards to me. Are you mirrored or not?
Oh, apparently I need to unmirror. Okay. So now can everybody read Jessup? Okay. So never mind. I'll leave the mirroring off. I guess I don't want the
Okay,
mirroring.
and that's what I wanted to figure out. And so one more quick check. Can you gesture to the right? Point to the right.
Okay. So this is me pointing to the right with my left hand. So I'm pointing to the right now.
Okay, and that's opposite for me. So I'm seeing you point to the left.
Well, then there's something wrong with your
Okay.
vision. I'm just kidding.
Like the screen. You're pointing to the left side of my screen.
Okay. Yeah.
But so then that's true that and we've seen that for, like, when I'm gesturing to the class, I usually have to mirror image my gestures. But
Right.
people to read something that you show to the camera, the mirror needs to be turned off.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you're
Okay.
showing, lifting something up to the camera, you'd want that mirroring turned off. But if you want to make gestures so that they see your gestures the same way that you're seeing your own gestures, you would turn the mirror on. So now it looks like I'm pointing to the right. So if I'm drawing a graph in my head going from left to right, now it looks like I'm going up from left to right for you. So it's something to be, again, like she said, something to be aware of. I'll go ahead and leave that off right now just so everybody can see my awesome Jessup shirt. All right, Ray, back to you. You're muted, Ray.
Yep, I'm back. Great question. Thank you. Okay, so the next set in the settings is the audio settings. You can also reach these settings from the unmute button down here. You just click up on the little up arrow there. The audio settings allow you to test your speaker. They allow you to test your microphone to make sure both are working. You can also, there's a number of things in here that you can do. One of the things that's important to know, and we'll touch on it again a little bit later, is if you find yourself in a low bandwidth internet situation, you can always join audio by phone, and which, you know, every Zoom invite will give you a dial-in, and all you need is the meeting code and the password, and that'll reduce the bandwidth that your internet connection is using. And if assuming you have, you know, good phone service or a landline, it allows you to have some pretty clear audio that way. So. Next setting, share screen. This is where you allow you sort of your settings for allowing participants to share their screen or not. You can, these are largely self-explanatory, but you can enter full screen when a participant shares, which is sometimes very handy because that way when somebody shares, you see the full picture. You don't run the risk of missing anything. You can maximize it when a participant shares. Scaling to fit the shared content in a Zoom window is, I personally have that one set so that I can see everything that they're sharing rather than inadvertently being zoomed in or zoomed out too far. You can enable remote control of all applications, which for obvious reasons you want to be a little careful of if you're sharing your screen with anyone. You can do side-by-side mode, and you can silence system notifications when sharing the desktop. So the next setting is virtual background. This is what you see Manuel and Bradley both have. Bradley has a black background. Manuel has a picture of a pretty office. You can import photos here. You can also, if you have a green screen, like here's how you would import one. You would click add, and you just simply add an image or add a video of the background. We're not going to actually do that, but that's where you would do it. If you have a green screen, you can use that, and you can also this is another setting for mirroring, so which we just learned about. Pick one, click on it, and it'll change your virtual background. the recording settings. So this right now, and there's another, we're going to cover recordings here in a second once we get to the bottom icons, but these are the recording settings for if you are going to record your lectures, your class sessions and put them up into Moodle. These are the settings that you'll use to, like, you can add a timestamp, you can choose a location for the files when the meeting ends. So in other words, it'll let you pick where you want to put it. You can record a separate audio file for everybody that speaks. So for instance, if you had people presenting a project individually, you could record that. You can optimize for a third-party video editor, which is super important if you're going to actually take it and do anything with it afterwards. And you can record a video during screen sharing, which again, that's a setting you can choose. The statistics setting is really that, it's CPU and memory usage. I don't really find myself using this very much. I think if you are, you can show these, you can see your audio, you can see your video statistics, and you can see your screen sharing statistics. So if you're interested in those, you can find those. This setting is simply a feedback. If you have any feedback about Zoom for Zoom, not for the EdTech, for Zoom, feel free to write it in here. If you are someone who enjoys using keyboard shortcuts, this provides an enormous range of shortcuts that you can toggle on or toggle off. This is very much, I find, a personal preference. If I think people tend to fall in the category of those who do use shortcuts and those who don't. If you do, here's how to set it up so you can really quickly do what you need to do in Zoom with just your keyboard. And then the last in the settings is accessibility. So this will allow you to, and we're going to talk about closed captions in a second, so hang tight on closed captions, but this will allow you to change font sizes. I can't seem to move it. Maybe I'm not doing it right. You can change the chat display size, and you can show or not show the meeting controls. So let's take a quick pause. I can't really monitor the chat, but I know there's some questions. Is there anything, Ahmad, Manuel, or Bradley, that we need to make sure we address before we move on? Nope.
I don't think anything.
Nothing pressing in there, unless there's any questions that people would want to unmute quickly and ask. There's nothing pressing in the chat.
I have a couple of quick ones. Ray,
Yes, sir.
We don't need to set anything for recording, correct? Our classes will record and post automatically. Is that correct?
I believe if it's set up in via Moodle, it will post and record automatically. Right? Is that
Right.
correct?
Well, there is a setting. So if you go back to the video that was posted for basic training that Manuel did, he went through setting up the Moodle module.
Right.
And in that Moodle module, when you're setting up those reoccurring meetings, there's an option that says record to cloud. So if that's selected, then yes, once the recording is started by you, it will record to the cloud automatically. If that tick box is not selected, then no, it won't. You would still have the option of clicking the record button and manually starting the recording. But yeah, if you want to record automatically, just as soon as you start the meeting, you'll need to have that checkbox clicked.
Okay. Thank you.
You get your answer, Fritz? You good? Okay, super. Okay, moving on down here to the lower left where you see the microphone. This is currently muted because we have 2 sessions going and we would end up with some pretty serious feedback. But if you look at this,
I have one question.
yeah, go ahead.
I couldn't get it unmuted.
No worries.
Ray, thank you for what your walkthrough on that. On the recording, are the editing tools fairly limited?
I think they're only limited by how much, like, I mean, I guess my answer would be they're only limited by your own video editing skills, because the output format is completely editable. So it's not.
Well, and there are no.
Go ahead, Bradley.
There are no built-in editing tools, though. So Zoom does not have a built-in editor within the browser interface. So what you would need to do is download those recordings, edit them on software of your choice, and there are free softwares that you can do for video editing, although the learning curves vary in levels of steepness. But those are for editing them yourselves. Like, for example, if you wanted to do, you can use Zoom to kind of make a recording of just yourself and then post it to YouTube or something like that. Some people will use it in those types of circumstances. So they may edit it to cut out things that they don't want, splice different clips together, things like that.
So I could download to iMovie, do some editing, and then bring it back.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure. Great question. Thanks. Okay, so down here by the microphone, if you click on the little up arrow, you're going to see a lot here. Okay, so normally, this is I'm showing you Bradley's setup, and he has a lot of different options for both speaker and microphone. Typically, there will only be one, possibly two outputs, but this basically allows you to pick which microphone you'd like to use for Zoom for the current session, and then which output speaker you would like to use. You can always choose same as system, which basically means it will revert to whatever your laptop's default is. You saw before, if you click on the test speaker and microphone, if you click on this, it will take you back to that section where we showed you the audio settings where you can test your speaker and microphone. This is what I discussed a little bit earlier on the phone audio. If you're on computer, it's a little bit sketchy. You want to switch over to your phone, click on this, and it'll actually give you the number to dial, the meeting ID, and the participant ID. And that's how you would switch to your phone audio. You can leave the computer audio, which I won't do because we're going to need that. And then this is another way to go to the audio settings. So it's just another mechanism to get back to that same audio setting. Same thing for stopping the video. You can effectively stop your video, mute your video if you will. You click on the up arrow, it gives you a selection of which camera you would like to use. Normally, most laptops, most desktops will have one camera option. Again, Bradley's setup has several. Here's another way to get to choosing your virtual background. It's the same setting you saw earlier, just another mechanism to get there, another route. And then the last one is the video settings, which again takes you to the same video settings. So, all right. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about over here is the next icon called security. So the top two on these are pretty important. The first is lock meeting. So if you have everybody in the meeting, every student in the meeting, or every other faculty member, staff member in the meeting that you want, you can lock the meeting so nobody else can get in. There is a downside to this, which is if somebody drops, they can't get back into a locked meeting unless you unlock it. So just understand that if you have a student who drops accidentally, they won't be able to get it back in unless you unlock the meeting. I had this happen a couple times this spring where I would lock the meeting for security purposes. Somebody would drop and then they'd have to text me or email me to please let me back in. So you can enable the waiting room. All of you came in through the waiting room. That basically allows you to figure out who's coming in and identify them prior to them joining your meeting. This section here is what your meeting participants can do. So what you as the host will let them do. Right now, they can chat. They can rename themselves. So that's every one of you, and you can unmute them yourselves. If you click this off, the only way that they can be unmuted is if you unmute them. If you click this off, there's no chat behind the scenes. And if you click this off, the name that they come in with is the name that they keep for the entirety of the meeting. If I click this on, it would allow everybody to share the screen so that if you have, for instance, somebody presenting a project presentation, they need to do a Google Slides or a PowerPoint, you can do that. If for some reason you have an unidentified participant or a participant you would otherwise like to eject from your Zoom session, you can use the Remove Participant button. So those are the security settings. Quick pause. Any questions that we need to answer at this point before we continue on the rest of the icons? Nope. All good.
One thing to note is all this is done via the desktop client. So particularly whenever he goes into settings, those are settings you would only see when you are in a meeting through the desktop client, not if you're joining through the app and not if you're joining through the browser. So do keep that in mind. Also, oh, go ahead.
What was the prompt to get to that, what you're looking at right now? Just hit participants?
Security.
I know, where's that button?
Down at the bottom.
Right at the bottom here.
You don't have it because you're not the host of the meeting.
Okay, got it. That's all I
So
need.
these are all the controls that you would see if you're hosting the meeting. If you're not hosting the meeting, you see a much smaller set of icons.
Great question. Thank you. Okay. So the next icon we have down here is participants. If we click on the participants button, we see, and remember, this is our demonstration Zoom meeting, the one you're seeing here. So we have 4 participants. And in the participants window here, you can do a lot of things. You can unmute. I won't because we'll get a feedback loop, but I could unmute Bradley. I could unmute Manuel. I could also stop Bradley's video, or I could stop Ahmad's video. And then I can click on this more button, which also offers me the option to rename. So if I wanted to rename somebody, I could do that as well.
Click on somebody who's not host and you'll get more options.
Yeah. On Ahmad. Sorry, thanks. I could stop Ahmad's video or spotlight it. I could make Ahmad the host. I could make him the co-host. I could assign Ahmad to type the closed caption, which we'll talk about in a second, rename him, or I could actually put him back in the waiting room. And then worst case, and this is another place where you can actually remove a participant if you need to. So there's a series of options for what you might need to do or not do with participants from this particular menu, from this participants icon. And down here, what you see is the feedback buttons. So Bradley, you want to click on one? Do you have the ability to do that? Or,
You are me in this scenario.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, sorry. So if I click on yes, so I could ask the entire group a question, and I could get a vote for yes, I could get a vote for no, and it will actually, if you see right above this, it will do a counter for you. So you might want to ask a class if they need a break. If it's, say, a 3-hour class, you ask them, and it'll show the counter above both yes and no. You can also ask about the pace. People can say, hang on, slow down. They can say, go faster. And again, the counter is, I don't know if hopefully you can see that on your screens, but there's a little 1 above there because I just clicked on it. And then over here, there's other feedback. So there's thumbs down, thumbs up. What is that one, Bradley? It's
clapping hands.
Oh, it's clapping hands. Sorry. Yeah, hard to see from the shared screen. So if you want to provide applause, this is requesting a break. And then this, if long sessions or long classes, you might step away and you can put the away indicator on so that everybody can see that you're away from the meeting. So all of this happens from the participant icon down here at the bottom, and it all happens in that window that will be on the right side of your Zoom session.
So you guys actually have those options available to you right now. So if you click on, everybody should have the participants button. And if you open that up, you'll have those options and you guys could click yes. So one person has clicked 2, 2 people have clicked 3, 4, 5. Okay, you guys are getting the idea. But you have those options, and it shows up in the participant list as well.
So next, we have the chat function. So because over here in security, right, we have chat enabled, chat works. So what you would see here in the Zoom group chat is from, in this case, me as Bradley, because he's sharing his screen with me, but you can communicate from yourself to everyone. And right down here, super important, if I wanted to send a direct message to Manuel, I just send that and it goes just to Manuel's chat. I have to click back to everyone. It doesn't default back. It's really important. You have to intentionally click whichever one that you want to send to. It won't go off of the one you most recently sent to. So it persists in that one. If you would like to attach a file in chat, you can click on that and it'll open a dialog box. You can attach a file. And alternatively, you can actually restrict who a participant can chat with. So participant can chat with no one, only the host, everyone publicly, or everyone publicly and privately. So you have a lot of options in terms of how you restrict the chat.
Can I offer a few extra comments?
I'm sorry, Brad, what?
Can I offer a few extra
Oh,
comments?
please do. Absolutely.
So right now we have both of these enabled, but if you only enable one or the other, they get bigger, or you obviously turn them off completely. So if I just have chat enabled, then it takes up the entire right-hand panel. If I just have participants enabled, it takes up the right-hand panel. If I have both enabled, they get kind of a top and bottom split for that right-hand panel. So if you're only interested in one or the other. In participants, let me actually move that up to the middle by turning chat back on. There are also these other 3 buttons at the bottom. So this is another way you can invite further people into the meeting. If you click on that invite button, it gives you a bunch of different options for further inviting people to your meeting if they missed the initial invitation. You can send emails, you can copy the invitation to your clipboard and then paste it in like Google Chat or your favorite chat app, copy an invite link and email that out manually. You can find your meeting password here. Most of this information is replicated up in that early icon in the top left that Ray already showed. So it's just replicated information. Okay. There's a quick mute all button. So you can press that and it mutes everybody automatically. And then again, there's overflow with, again, a lot of extra meeting options. So you can clear all the feedback. So everybody's feedback that they did in our meeting, I can clear all, and now it's all gone. So all those yes, no's, and everything else you clicked are gone now. We could start over. You can enable and disable the waiting room. So for example, the enable waiting room was enabled for the beginning of this meeting, but as soon as I started the meeting and let everybody in, I disabled the waiting room so that anybody that came in a little bit late, I wouldn't have to go over and manually let them in again. They would just automatically pop into the meeting at that point because the waiting room was now gone. The enter exit chime. This will play a little sound every time somebody comes in or out. And there's another setting I'll show you later on to determine who it plays for. So if I turn this on right now, anybody that entered and exited this meeting, I would hear. There would be a little chime. For big meetings like this, I usually have that off because there's 30 of you that are coming in and potentially leaving, and that's a lot of chiming. But for class, I like to have it on so that I'm aware if a student tries to sneak out. It'll play a little chime and then I'll hear, or a chime and then I know a student came in late. So that's usually something I have on, and we can set that as a default, and I'll show you how to do that later on. And again, then the renaming, there's a lot of replicated options here that we could manually set for each individual person that you can set globally down here. One last really important thing is if you ever enter a meeting that you set up and you're missing a bunch of these icons that you should be seeing, it's probably that for some reason maybe you didn't log in first into the desktop client, but it's not recognizing you currently as host. There will be a button down here that says claim host. So if you're in a meeting that you know you're supposed to be hosting, but you don't see those options, you'll want to go into participants, find the claim host button, and click on that. And it'll give you a couple options of ways to claim host. One of them will just be to sign in, and you want to click that sign in option. It'll take you to the desktop client. You'll sign in, and then you will become host of that meeting, and you'll have all of these icons that you should have as host. Last little thing is there's a little down arrow on the top of both of these. That's so you can pop these out and make them fully separate windows if you want. Usually that would only be best if you're running a multi-monitor setup and you want to have your chat and your participants on a completely separate monitor, and then your main window with the gallery view on one monitor. But if you're just, running this on a laptop, it's better generally to have them all right there embedded. So you can click the pop out option, and then once they're popped out, there's an option to pop them back in that appears in this overflow menu. So that you can bring them back in. Okay, sorry, go ahead, Ray.
Oh, super, thanks.
Actually, quick question. A couple questions came up on how they can download the chat and so forth. And when they're recording, does everything in the chat, even the private messages, show up in the chat.
So when you save a recording, there is an option to save the chat. You can set that up ahead of time, and I'll show you those chat options at a later point. If you start a recording manually, I believe it does. I mean, I don't start very many recordings manually. I'm either planning on recording or not. And I can't remember if it gives you the option when you start a recording manually to download the chat. I'll have to check on that.
Yeah, I can't remember I believe you can always download it. I don't know about the private chat messages.
Does it give me the option right now? No. Yeah, it can be done globally for recordings that auto start. I don't believe that it records private messages. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I don't think that it does. I think it only records what's in the main chat.
Yeah, that is, yeah. But we will figure out that answer and get it out to everybody. So, okay, so that's security, participants, chat. Oops, sorry, my chat. Share screen. So this is where, oh, hang on.
The cursor disappear?
No, I'm getting just an overlap on in the windows. It's just my window setup. I got it fixed. So
Okay.
this will allow you to share your screen. So there's a couple of important things here. So these are the basic settings. This will allow you to pick which window you would like to share. You can like Bradley has 2 screens. You can share screen 1 or screen 2. You can share the whiteboard. This you can see here, you can actually share just the chat. You can share the participants. So it's important that the only thing your participants will see is whichever window that you actually share. When you share, you can also determine if you want to share computer sound and whether or not you want to optimize the screen sharing for a video clip. So if you're going to play a video clip for students, you're going to want to share computer sound and also optimize for sharing the video clip. In advanced, you can actually pick a portion of the screen that you would like to share. You can do sharing just music or computer sound only, or alternatively, if you had a second camera, you can share from just that as well. All right, so this is the record, and Bradley's going to touch, when he reviews the settings, he's going to touch on record, but basically when you click on this record button as the host, you're going to get 2 options, record to this computer or record to the cloud. And I'm not going to click on either one because I don't want to mess up our recording this time. But either way, you can record it locally, you record to cloud. I believe, Bradley, correct me if I'm wrong, our accounts are set up to default to record to the cloud.
Only if you have that button, or if you have that option selected when you're setting up the meeting from the webinar phase, and that option gives you to record to the cloud. Yeah.
Perfect. And you'll touch on that setting in just a little bit. Okay, and in the last intermediate session we did, there was a lot of questions around closed captioning. So there is an option to close caption, but it's fairly limited. So basically, you can assign someone else to type the closed captions, or you can volunteer to type the closed captions yourself. There is a third option, which is to use a third-party closed captioning service. We are still in the process of investigating both the viability and cost of these third-party services and whether or not it might make sense. And we're also in the process of evaluating whether or not we can actually take the transcripted file and align that with the video such that we can actually make it so that we actually have closed captions on the recordings that we upload to Moodle. So there's some work to be done there. So okay, breakout rooms. If you are hosting a class and you want to put everybody into breakout rooms, you simply use the breakout room function. This allows you 2 basic choices. You can automatically assign them, or you can manually assign them. It will assign, because this is a small meeting, it assigns 3 participants to 1 room, But if we had a whole bunch of participants, we would simply say, hey, we want to assign, for instance, manually assign 3 participants to, now it's hard to kind of click on this, to 2 rooms. So that would obviously not, it would have 1 person in one room and 2 in the other, but it really doesn't work. So you can either automatically do it and pick the number of rooms, or you can manually do it and pick the number of rooms. When it picks for you, it'll give you a range here because there's such a small number. And then you would simply say create rooms. So any questions on closed captioning, record, or breakout rooms?
Ray, I would just say in breakout rooms, I usually do it automatically, and then it shows you who's in those rooms.
Yeah.
And then I quickly look at those and I go, oh, no, I need to put this person to room 3 and switch that one to 2. So
Yep.
it's a lot faster to do it automatically, but it still has that option of, yeah, but I don't want these 2 together, or I need, more leadership in this group. So
It's a great point, Fritz. Thank you. Yeah, you can still, just because it doesn't automatically doesn't mean it's irrevocable. You can switch them around as needed. Okay, last 2, we have reactions. So if everybody has seen a thumbs up or a clapping hands, this is an instantaneous reaction. So you can click on either one of those to respond to something a participant has said silently, without needing to unmute, without needing to have anybody unmute you, especially valuable if you choose to leave everybody permanently muted without the ability to unmute themselves. These can be very helpful functions. So there's another way to get feedback that sort of helps along with the feedback that you can provide in the participant window. So, okay. And then finally on this more button here, this allows you, if you were so inclined, to stream live your Zoom session, whatever it is, on Facebook, on Workplace by Facebook, or on YouTube. And it'll also actually, you can add other services, but those are the 3 that are set up currently. So if for some reason you wanted to stream it live, you could do that. It's a setting that you would have to enable, but it's certainly something that's doable. So
There's about a 20-second delay if you choose to stream to YouTube, though. So just be aware of that. One setting that's not down there that we're going to demo is polls. So normally there would be a polls button down there for various reasons because of how we're hosting that it's not currently showing, but there would be a polls button down there allowing you to poll everybody. So do you want me to demo that, Ray?
yeah, that would be super, because I can't from remote control. Thank you.
So I'm gonna demo that. I'm actually going to demo that to all of you, though. I'm going to bring my controls over here. So you would hit this polls button. This is a second set of controls because, again, I'm in 2 meetings right now. You wouldn't normally see this. But this is what the button would look like that you would see. So you'd hit that polls button. It brings up this poll, and you can edit the name of the poll. And if you do that, it's going to take you to the web portal and ask you to sign in. So I'm already signed in, so it just took me there. But if you weren't signed in, it would ask you to sign in. I got to move all these controls out of the way now. But it would take you to the web interface, so you could enter the name of this poll, test poll. You could choose whether or not it's an anonymous poll or not. So whether or not with each answer or response, the person's name and or email address is recorded. And then you can type your question here. So doing like this poll, you can have it where they can provide multiple answers or a single choice. So we'll just do a single choice. Yes, no. And then if I scroll down, move this out of the way, you can add additional questions and they would have the same interface as this question. And then you can save it. And now it takes me out of that web interface and it takes me back to the little poll pop-up. So this is what the poll is going to look like when I decide to launch it. You can rewrite polls for a particular meeting. So if you set up a meeting ahead of time and then you go into the web portal interface, there's an option at the bottom to set a poll up ahead of time if you just want it to go. And I'll show you that in the web interface later. But then you would click Launch Poll. So if I do this, you guys will all get this poll. All right. So you should all have that poll. It should either pop up or be flashing for you. And notice it's recording these responses in real time. So one of you did not like my poll. It's not anonymous, so I know who you are, and I will exact my revenge later. But at some point, you can cut that off. So we'll go ahead, end polling, and then we would have those results. So I can relaunch, I can share results. If I share results, then those all should be available to you to see now as well.
Bradley, may I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Hi, this is Richard Mullis, and I use a Macintosh. Is this polling function available on Mac as well as the Dell computers at school, or only one or the other?
These options, the desktop interface, except for some visual aspects, should all be the same between Windows and Mac desktop client. Again, you have to be using the desktop client, but it should be available both in Windows and Mac, yes.
Richard, this is Ray. I use a Mac all the time, and yes, it's available. You should have no trouble setting it up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll stop sharing those. I'm not going to relaunch the poll. We'll go ahead and close that. But that's the basics of a polling if you want to do a poll right in the moment. Polls cannot be set for individual breakout rooms. Polls are global only. Okay, so if you need to poll just a specific breakout room, you'll have to use third-party means, something like a Google form, and then you give that link and ask just one particular breakout room to use that particular Google form or something like that. So these polls only work globally for the entire meeting. So that's one thing to be aware of. And then, of course, you can come back in and you can further edit or delete this poll from the web interface. I'm going to go ahead and delete since we don't need that poll. And then we're back to this. Before we go into the web interface, I was going to do one little also demo of the breakout rooms so you guys can experience what the breakout rooms would look like from your perspective. So again, you would hit that breakout room button down here. You could do automatic or manual. You would click the create rooms button. It'll pop up a little interface, looks like this, and this is where Fritz was remarking you can move people around. So this was done automatically, and again, this is our test meeting with only 4 people, so it put Manuel and Ray in one room and Ahmad another. It doesn't assign the host to a room, so right now that's me, and so I'm not in there. I can choose, once I create these rooms, I can choose to join and exit any of those rooms, and so I can pop in and out if I want. And if I don't like these rooms, I can move them around. So I could move Manuel down to breakout room 2. Or we could, I could add a room. And then I could move Ahmad down to breakout room 3. And they're each in their own breakout room. And it's like a little timeout. Participants can exit the breakout room at will, though. So these are not, it's not like the waiting room where you can send somebody there and they can't come back until you admit them. You can put them in their breakout rooms, but they can pop back into the main meeting at any time, although they can't enter other breakout rooms that they have been assigned to. So it's either the main meeting or the breakout room they've been assigned to. And then I would click open all rooms, and that would at that point ask those people to click a little button to join those meetings. Other options that you can do is move all participants to breakout rooms automatically if you don't want the button to pop up that says, would you like to go into your room? You can turn off that ability for people to come back to the main session at any time. So it would be more like a timeout at that point. you turn that off. Breakout rooms close them automatically after a certain amount of time, and then countdown for closing breakout rooms. So when we turn off the breakout rooms, there'll be a 60-second countdown for everybody to finish up whatever they're doing, and then they close and everybody's automatically returned to the main session. Yeah, you can recreate these if you didn't like how it automatically split them up and you didn't want to manually move people around. Once you create the rooms, so let me actually go ahead and do this just so I can show you the other options that will be available. So we'll go ahead and move people automatically, and we'll move this to 10 seconds. And then we will open all rooms, and you'll see that the other participants are slowly disappearing because they've been moved to their breakout room. And now I'm the only one left in the main session. So now in that menu, I have the ability to click join, and I could join any of those breakout rooms, pop in, and then pop out. I can broadcast a message to all. Again, I can't broadcast a message to individual breakout rooms, but I can broadcast to all. So just, you know, this is what you should be doing. And or something like that. So you can remind them or send some type of message to all breakout rooms. And then I can click close rooms, and it'll give me a little counter, and in another 5 seconds, people will start popping back in if they don't choose to pop back in manually. Okay, so all the breakout rooms are closed. Everybody's back in the main session. I could open those rooms again or not. So just so you experience this from your end, I'm going to go ahead and create some breakout rooms. So, oh, you know what? Manuel's actually hosting this meeting. I don't know that I have the option to do breakout rooms as the non-primary host. So Manuel, you might actually have to create the breakout rooms if we're going to test this.
Bradley, can I ask a quick question?
Oh, absolutely.
So I use breakout rooms every day in my class, and 2 questions. One, is there any way that we can get the screen to show while they're in their breakout room? Second thing, when I come back from breakout session, every time I had to click screen share again. It wouldn't automatically, when everybody came back, they wouldn't automatically see my screen, and I would forget to turn it back on. Is there any way to keep that on when they all come back?
So the breakout room becomes its own little room. So yeah, they won't see your screen share anymore, and it'll automatically disable the screen share when you do that. So you will have to just remember to turn it back on, and you can't share. Within a breakout room, individuals can screen share because it treats that as a whole separate room. So if you join a room, or if they're in a room and they want to screen share with each other, assuming you've enabled that security option for them to do that, they could share with each other.
But just their own screen, not my screen. So for example, I have dialogues I want them to remember when they get and practice it in their breakout session. So what they actually had to do would take a picture of the screen, and then when they went to breakout room, they'd have the dialogue with them.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, that is how it is. There are some other workarounds for that, which we will actually be discussing next week in the advanced session, but involves using alternate methods of essentially alternate whiteboard spaces, alternate whiteboard methods that don't require you to share your screen for you to still be sharing content. And then that wouldn't change when they go into a breakout room. But yeah, that is something to be aware of. One other thing is you can, oh, go ahead, Bobby. Go ahead.
You're muted, Bobby.
Okay, sorry, it disabled my puncher. So if we do the whiteboard option, I know you're going to get to this next time, would PowerPoint be able to be used in whiteboard?
Through some roundabout means. Let's put it that way for now. There are some ways to accomplish what you want. Yes, for sure. One last thing is breakout rooms, just like polls, can be set up ahead of time. There are some caveats to that. but you can pre-assign breakout rooms so that you can manually figure out who you want where ahead of time, and then the breakout rooms would already be set up. But we'll get to that in the web interface. All right, Manuel, did you want to like just do an automatic breakout room and send everybody for a few minutes and then call them back?
Sure. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll set up, let's see, let me set up about 7. I think we have around 30 or so. So, okay. So I'll call you back in just a moment.
Okay, I'm not actually going to go into the breakout room because
Okay.
otherwise it will, I want to be able to keep monitoring the recording.
I'll do a quick broadcast to him too.
Okay. I can see Ahmad pantomiming in on the other meeting. He's talking to somebody in his breakout room. Apparently.
Who is whiteboard? There's somebody up there. Whiteboard.
That's me. I joined from my Chromebook, which I usually use as a whiteboard.
Okay.
And I did it so that I would be able to monitor what the screen share itself looked like.
Okay. They should be coming back in now. This was set for 60 seconds, so.
Hey, Bradley,
Yes, sir.
this has been really helpful.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I'm glad it's making sense. It is a lot of information, though.
No,
So
it's good. I mean, half of it was review, but half of it was new, so it was good. And I'll look forward to I'll go back and watch the first one too, and then the advanced one is coming up next week.
part 1 of the advanced. Yeah,
Okay,
there's
cool.
going to be a couple.
All right, good job.
Okay, everyone should be back in about 3 seconds here. Okay. All right, Brad, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. So it actually doesn't look like my screen sharing stopped. Can everybody still see my screen share when you came back in?
Yeah.
I think that's probably because I didn't myself join any of the breakout rooms, so it didn't interrupt my screen share. So instantly, Bobby, if you're still with us, that might be one thing. If you don't join any of the breakout rooms, it may not interrupt your screen share. Okay, so the last part, not that it's necessarily a super short part, but the last part of this I wanted to go over is some of the web settings, because it's important to make sure that you actually have the option for all these settings turned on. So things like, for example, closed captioning, breakout rooms, polls, some of those options can be turned on or off via the web interface so that they will just always or never be available to you, even as a host. So you need to make sure that those options are turned on. The web portal options also set your global defaults for all meetings. Now, again, many of those can be changed within a specific meeting itself, but you're basically establishing what you kind of want your default meeting to be. So let's go to that. So the way that you go to that is you would open a browser, you go to the window, and you would go to zoom.us. I'm already signed in, so let me actually sign out just so you can see. Oh, no, I'm not signed in. Perfect. Okay. So you would go to zoom.us, then you would need to sign in. So you would click My Account. You sign in. Now, many of you, like myself, may have multiple Zoom accounts, like a personal and then the one provided via Jessup with your Jessup credentials. So it's important that you sign in with the right one. Since we're using single sign-on, you need to make sure to sign in with Google with this button down here. So if you're using the Jessup licensed account, it will not be a username and password that you enter manually. It will be sign in with Google. Now I have my credentials saved, but if you didn't have your credentials saved, when you clicked that, it would take you to our standard Google sign-in thing where, there'll be a little pop-up card and it would say enter your email address, and that's where you would enter your Jessup email address. Then it would slide over and would ask you for your Jessup password. You'd enter that, and then it would sign you in. All right. But again, if you want to be in your Jessup license account, you need to sign that in. You can always check that by clicking on this profile, and that's where it defaulted me to. And you can look at user type under profile, and notice it says licensed. So that's how you make sure that you're actually signed in with your Jessup credentials with a licensed account. So you avoid things like the 40-minute meeting restriction, and you get certain advanced options like cloud recording, etc. Okay. Meetings takes you through all your preset meetings that you've already established. So I have certain recurring meetings that I've already set up, and then I have meetings, one-off meetings that I've created that appear here. You can go, you can start them. I wouldn't want to do that with any of these, but you can click on any of these, and that would allow you to manually adjust those settings. Down here in settings though, this is where we set up our global settings. I'm not going to go through all of these settings. I have a select few that I want to go through because there are quite a few. But I do want to go through some of these. So they divide into essentially these 5 broad categories of settings. So scheduling meetings, in meetings, basic, in meeting, advanced, email notifications, and others. I'm going to focus on these first 3 and just certain settings within each of those. So settings, meetings, host video. So this is just the option where if it's turned on or off, determines whether or not you default have your video set to on or off when you join a meeting. So you can turn that off, and then by default, you would never have your video turned on. You would still have the option of turning it on, of course, but again, it's just establishing a default. Is your video on or off when you are hosting a meeting and you start it? Same with participant videos. Participants can always override these if they have the setting that allows for the dialog box to pop up before they join a meeting. If they don't, though, and they don't have a default set, if you have this set, then your setting will take over, and any participant that joins, I have set to their video will be turned on. We're going to skip audio type, and we're going to go down to join before host. So this allows people to join a meeting before you have officially started that meeting. So if you send out a link to the meeting, people could click on it at any time. And if you have join before host turned on, they can actually pop into that meeting, potentially hours, days, or whatever before the meeting actually starts. Sometimes I will do this for class just in case I'm late. They can jump into the meeting and at least start talking to each other. If you turn that off, then when they try and join a meeting that you haven't started, a little pop-up will pop up, and it'll say the host has not yet started this meeting, please wait. Okay. Enable, we're going to skip personal ID, require password. So there's a bunch of security options, and where is it? There it is, down here. Require password when scheduling new meetings. So this should be by default on for everybody. In theory, you could turn it off, although I wouldn't recommend it. This just says that every meeting is password protected. Okay. That being said, another one that you can have on is that this one down here that says embed password in invite link for one-click join. That takes that password and embeds it within the URL. So most of you, when you joined it, probably did not have to type in a password, even though this meeting is password protected. And it's because I have this option set that embedded that password within the URL link. So basically what that means is if that link gets out, random people could still, in theory, join this meeting. It really only protects it at this point if the meeting ID gets out, but not the password. Because another way to join a meeting is by manually entering a meeting ID that you want to join and a meeting password. So just be aware of that. If you have it password protected, but you also have the meeting ID or the meeting password embedded within the link, which is the default, anybody that gets a hold of that URL can join. Mute participants on entry. This one, I think it's on by Oh, no, I don't actually think this is on by default for everybody, but I highly recommend that you turn it on. So mute participants on entry. This will override any setting that they have enabled, and anytime a participant joins, they start muted. It's good to have this turned on just because, again, it prevents a lot of audio feedback where a bunch of people join, there's noise going on in their background, they're yelling at their dog, things like that, and you get all that background noise, so that people have to sort of consciously turn on their audio if they want to ask a question or something like that. So I highly recommend that. Okay, let's go to in meetings basic. First is, incidentally, the chat options, I guess I will cover these, is prevent participants from saving chat. I currently have that enabled. I don't know why. I think it was on by default and I just didn't change it. So you can prevent individuals that aren't the host from saving chat. Private messaging is turned on by default so people can save that. Auto saving chat. If you want to automatically always save chat, you can turn that on as a global option. And then every meeting will automatically save the chat. And it'll appear in your cloud recordings. Sound notification for someone joins or leaves. I have this set on by default. Again, you can turn this off manually when the meeting is started, but I generally like to have it on so that anytime somebody enters or exits a meeting, I get a little audio chime that lets me know. You can have it set where everyone hears it or only the hosts and co-hosts hear it. I have it set for just me because, again, it's not as important to me that everybody else knows who's joining and leaving, just that I know who's joining and leaving of a meeting I'm hosting. The next one I want to do is, let's see, polling. So down here, this one is now turned on by default, and I actually think it's been locked by the admin. So all of you should have this available if you're hosting a meeting, and you can't currently turn it off. If for some reason you don't see polls, though, you can check this option here and always contact IT if for some reason it is turned off, and that's why you're not seeing the poll option in a meeting that you're hosting. Let's see, always show meeting control bars. So this is, you may notice if you're on the desktop app, where sometimes you don't see your desktop controls and you have to move your mouse to the bottom of the screen and then they pop up. This is just locks that on or off. So I have it set to always be locked on so that my meeting controls aren't popping up and down. Let's see. Screen sharing. You can set your global options whether or not screen sharing is by default turned on or off. Who can share, host, or all participants. You can set that automatic. Regardless of these settings, you will always have to turn it on for every meeting from that security setting. So you remember that little security shield that Ray clicked on? And one of the options on the security shield was share screen. You always have to turn that on or off manually in every single meeting. So even if you have these options set to where screen sharing is turned on, and let's say you still had all participants clicked for sharing, you would still need to manually turn on within the security options that sharing was actually turned on for that meeting. And again, they primarily instituted that just so that people wouldn't randomly hijack a meeting and start sharing their screen with whatever. Once all participants are allowed to screen share, you can decide whether or not screen sharing can be essentially hijacked from one person to another. So who can start sharing when somebody else is sharing, only the host or all participants. So it depends on how unruly your class is if they're going to be constantly sort of taking over screen sharing from one another. I just have it defaulted to host, and then I can manually turn on for all participants if I need to within the meeting itself. Let's see. Nonverbal feedback. Oh, whiteboard, sorry. If you want the whiteboard option when you're screen sharing, you have to turn that on. And then nonverbal feedback. Nonverbal feedback were all of those buttons in the participant menu. So that yes, no, go slower, go faster, the little coffee cup, things like that. Those may or may not be on for you. If you want those options to appear when you're hosting a meeting for other people, you have to click that on, and then those buttons will be available to your participants. Allow participants to rename themselves. So you can, by default, have this turned on or off. By default, I have it turned off so that my students cannot rename themselves. I require all my students to use their actual name so that I know who's talking and it's not gibberish or something funny or whatever. I want to see my students' names, and then I don't allow them to rename themselves. I will say this is only if you're not requiring authentication, which we'll talk about in a moment, this is only of some use because whenever somebody who is not signed into a Zoom account opens it up, like if they join through the web interface, then they get to choose their name on entry. And they can set it to whatever they want. So if they did want to rename themselves, in theory, they could just drop the meeting and then rejoin and choose a different name. But this at least prevents them from renaming themselves just within the meeting and constantly doing that. I had students that thought it was really funny to constantly be changing their name throughout an entire class session. Let's see. Okay, in meeting advanced, just want to go through a couple. Breakout rooms, again, have to be turned on. I think they're on by default, but if for some reason you're hosting a meeting and you're not seeing them, it means you need to double check this button and make sure it's turned on. And then this, allow hosts to assign participants to breakout rooms when scheduling. That means you can, whoops, I want that on. That's allowing you to preset what those breakout rooms are. So you have to turn that on as an option, otherwise it won't appear in your meeting settings. There are some caveats to this, which again, I'll get to momentarily. And then waiting rooms, same thing. Where's waiting rooms? Oh, there it is. So waiting rooms, I have those turned off by default because I don't want most of my meetings to have a waiting room where I have to manually allow people, but you could turn that on for all meetings that you're hosting. Again, you can turn it on for individual meetings though. So if you want it off by default, but then in individual meetings or scheduled meetings, you want it turned on, you can turn it on in those settings at that time. In theory, this show join from browser link, you could prevent people from joining from browser. If you only wanted them to be able to join from a desktop client, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that, as students with various access to various technologies, they may be joining from an iPad or an iPhone or a Chromebook or something like that. They may not have access to a full Windows or Mac computer that allows for the desktop usage. And so if you have that turned off, that would prevent those people from entering, and that could be problematic. But in theory, you could turn that off and then it wouldn't give them the option of joining from the browser. Okay, there's also email notifications and a few other things. They're kind of random. I'm not going to go over those. There are other settings that I didn't go over, so you're welcome to go through, and I would recommend just reading through some of these settings just to see them. There's documentation for what each of these settings do on Zoom's website. So if you ever want to know what something does, just do a Google search for Zoom, enable personal meeting ID, and the first link that comes up in your Google search should be, most often, Zoom's own official documentation for that function describing what it does and how it works. So it's for some of these more, some of these other options, that's a way to learn it. So the last thing I wanted to talk about, two more things. Sorry, this meeting is going kind of long. But meetings, if you want to change the settings, so let's go to my math department meeting. So again, this is where you would set up polls. So you click on the meeting to edit the settings, you click edit this meeting, or you just click down here, poll, and then add a poll. So I can pre-write a poll to send out during that meeting. You can edit this meeting and enable waiting rooms. And this is also where you would, so if I go to an edit meeting, breakout room pre-assign. So this is where I would assign the pre-assigned breakout rooms. So I'd click on create the rooms, and then I would add whatever rooms I want. You know, room 1, add another room, room 2, save. And then I could edit who's in those rooms. You do that from an import CSV, and here's the catch for doing this. In order for you to pre-assign breakout rooms, you assign those rooms via email address. It has to have some way of associating a particular user that joins your meeting with who they are and where you want them to go, and it does that via email address. What that means is if somebody joins and they're not an authenticated user, like they're just joining without signing in from the web browser, they won't have an email associated with that current guest. They'll just appear as guest. In the participant window, you can see who are joined from non-authenticated versus authenticated accounts because it'll highlight them in red. So for example, right now I can see a whole bunch of people that joined as guests and are not currently signed in. I'll call out one person since he's on the Ed Tech committee. So like Fritz, for example. Fritz is not currently signed in via his Jessup credentials. So he appears in red in my participants list. And so he just appears as a guest. So that means there's no email address associated with that guest user right now, even though he's got his name there, so I know it is Fritz. Which means if I had pre-set up breakout rooms, he would not move into a pre-assigned breakout room because it doesn't, the client doesn't know who he is or where I want him to go ahead of time. So you can pre-make these, but you would have to require that your students actually sign in to an authenticated, they have to authenticate that. They have to be signed into Zoom, and you would have to know what email address they're using to sign in. So well, I am in talks with IT. There are potentially a couple ways to force that on them, but we're in talks right now because it could have unintended consequences with technology and things like that. So there's some pros and cons to that. So that's just something to be aware of. Okay. I think that's everything that I wanted to go through in settings. I think we can actually open it up to just general questions now. I'm going to stop screen sharing.
Question, easy way to take attendance with Zoom. Of course, I covered that in the basic Zoom meeting. Do you want to say any comments on that, Brad?
I will say a few comments on that because it potentially suffers from the same issue as the authenticated users. So if you take attendance, so what Manuel's talking about is after a meeting's finished, you can go into reports and you can bring up a report of all unique attendees to your meeting. If they are not signed in via an email address, then all that will appear in that attendees list is whatever name they chose for themselves when they entered. So for example, if you look in our participants list right now, you can see, for example, somebody named Whiteboard. That's actually another one of my clients. And you can see somebody named iPad. But you wouldn't necessarily know who Whiteboard and iPad are. So that wouldn't necessarily help you with attendance. So you can make it a rule and tell your students you have to sign in with your real name from, so that I can see you in the participants list, or you can require them to sign in with an authenticated user. But if you bring up that report and you see names that you don't recognize and there's no email address there, you may not be able to take attendance that way. So that's just something you'll need to let your students know. If you want to use the reports for attendance, they have to have names or be authenticated with an email address that you can associate with that individual for that to report to mean anything to you.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I did do a demo on that first basic Zoom video that's on One Stop, so you can go back and look at a sample of that. But it's really important that they sign in with their first and last name, or else you won't know who they are. All right, any other questions?
Oh, I did remember one other thing that came up that I was supposed to talk about. How do you practice this stuff? So that came up. One way to practice this stuff is because you can sign in from a web browser and from unauthenticated, and you'll just appear a guest, is you can set up a meeting And you can join that meeting that you set up from, say, your desktop computer, then your iPhone or your Android phone, your Chromebook. You can join from multiple devices that aren't signed into Zoom, and those will appear as separate guests all on that same meeting. So you could actually join your own meeting multiple times, just so long as only one of those devices is actually signed into Zoom. And that would allow you to see kind of that meeting from multiple perspectives. It would allow you to control those other devices. You could practice muting and unmuting yourself on your phone, things like that. So that's one way to try this, is just to set up a meeting and join it from multiple devices, but make sure you're only signed in from one device. I think that's the only other thing I wanted to talk about. So we will be, I think we've come to the end. So we will be posting this recording. It looks like it recorded all the way through. Yay. So we will be, it may take a minute or a little while for it to actually render. But as soon as that's ready within the Zoom client, we'll be posting that link to that recording on Faculty One Stop. Additionally, we will be having a meeting next week, and you should be getting the invite for that in a day or two, for our first part of the advanced training, where we'll go over, right now the agenda is to go over some advanced screen sharing methodologies and some advanced pedagogical techniques for breakout rooms, and maybe a few other miscellaneous functions. And then part 2 of all of this is, the goal is to actually do a demo in one of the classrooms to show you how this all works in the context of one of the Jessup classrooms with the Podium computer, how you get signed in and all of that, so that you can actually see us walk through that process. But that would be roughly, should be 2 weeks from now. All right. Then thank you so much for attending, and we'll talk to you all later.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.